Lawyers. What's the most unhinged thing someone said during divorce proceedings? Story 1. I was a paralegal for a family law attorney, and one time during a deposition, the husband calmly said he believed the only fair way to divide the marital assets was to burn it all and start over. He wasn't being metaphorical. He had already torched their shared vacation cabin in Montana a few weeks earlier and said he was willing to do the same to the house, the cars, and everything we ever bought together. He said it with a smile on his face, just chilling, as if he was explaining how to split a pizza. The wife's lawyer literally said, "Excuse me, did you just confess to arson?" He replied, "Not arson if it's mine too." Spoiler, it very much was arson. Needless to say, we had to call in extra security for the courtroom hearing after that. The judge didn't even blink. Apparently she'd seen worse. But I still think about that guy every time I see a campfire. Story 2. I was representing the wife in a particularly messy divorce. The husband, who was self-represented, always a bad idea in these cases, brought a literal PowerPoint presentation to court titled, "Why My Wife is the Antichrist." Slide 1 was a blurry photo of her, giving a dirty look at a family barbecue. Slide 2 was her handwriting compared to demonic sigils. Slide 3, and I wish I was joking, was a list of people who had gotten sick after eating her cooking. He ended it by saying he believed the marriage was a setup by a cult to drain his spiritual energy, and that he wanted to be repaid in soul coins. The judge paused, took off her glasses and said, "Sir, that is not a real currency." We settled the case, mostly because the wife didn't want to be legally connected to him any longer than absolutely necessary. Story 3. Not a lawyer, but I was on the jury for a divorce case. Rare, but it was about a contested prenup. At one point, the husband claimed that the wife had been mentally abusing him by refusing to let him name their daughter, Khaleesi Aragorn. He said it was his God-given right to name his child after noble bloodlines. When the wife reminded him that he originally wanted to name their son Optimus Prime Jesus, he called her a traitor to imagination and said she was killing magic in the world. I had to look down and pretend to cough to avoid bursting out laughing. The judge had to call for a recess because half the courtroom was visibly shaking. Best part? They didn't even have kids yet. They were arguing over theoretical children. Story 4. This one stuck with me because of how surreal it was. We were in mediation, trying to divide assets. The husband flatly refused to give up his half of the family dog. Not because he loved the dog. He openly admitted he hated the dog, but because, and I quote, "If I can't have her, the dog shouldn't love her either." He then suggested the dog live with him Monday through Wednesday and with her Thursday through Saturday, and be kenneled on Sundays to reflect on loyalty. The mediator thought it was a joke at first. When she realized he was serious, she looked at me like, "What is happening?" The wife ended up offering him thousands of dollars just to keep the dog permanent. He accepted, then a week later dropped the dog off at her work with a note that said, "Traitors don't deserve goodbye hugs." Story 5. I once witnessed a man accuse his wife of witchcraft. In 2019, this was in a California courtroom, mind you. He claimed that every time they fought, he'd later lose money mysteriously, or his car would break down, and that she had been hexing his finances. He brought in a tiny vial of what he claimed was a cursed potion she'd kept in the spice cabinet. It was literally oregano and water. He said it was too suspiciously green to be anything else. The wife, an herbalist, calmly explained it was a tincture for digestion, and he shouted, "A likely story, Morgana." The judge had to excuse everyone from the courtroom for 10 minutes just to keep the proceedings from derailing completely. We ended up getting him to sign the divorce papers by agreeing she'd leave him her collection of essential oils for protection. Story 6. During a heated divorce trial, the husband suddenly blurted out, "She stole my lucky socks." The room fell dead silent. He then launched into a 5-minute rant about how he wore those socks during every job interview, every big meeting, and even during their wedding. He accused her of spiritual sabotage by removing them from his life. The kicker? The wife calmly reached into her purse, pulled out a neatly folded pair of socks and set them on the table. She said, "These? I was going to return them after the trial." He broke down in tears. Not over the marriage, over the socks. They spent 15 minutes negotiating sock custody. I wish I was joking. Story 7. I was the clerk for a judge in a small-town courthouse. We had a divorce case where the husband demanded that the wife return his emotional support iguana, named Spike. The wife, dead serious, said the iguana had chosen her. She even brought in a video of Spike crawling to her lap when both of them called his name. It turned into an unofficial pet custody hearing. They called in a reptile expert as a witness who said, "Iguanas don't typically bond emotionally the way dogs do." The husband stood up and shouted, "You take that back? He knows my pain." The iguana ended up staying with the wife. The husband appealed. Yes, appealed. We had to explain to him that you can't appeal reptile preferences. Story 8. In one mediation, the wife requested full ownership of their above-ground pool. The husband looked her dead in the eye and said, "Over my dead chlorine-soaked body." He argued that the pool represented his freedom and said she only wanted it to erase his identity. When the mediator tried to clarify, he went off about how he found inner peace floating on his inflatable pizza slice after a long day, and that no one could take that kind of healing away from a man. The wife, visibly exhausted, just said, "Let him keep the pool. It leaks anyway." 5 minutes later, he looked shocked and said, "Wait, it leaks?" Like she'd just broken his heart all over again. Story 9. I once had a client who was convinced her soon-to-be ex was communicating with their cat using a secret language. She insisted he had trained the cat to spy on her and report back through meows and tail twitches. She even had a notebook full of translated cat messages. Her attorney, poor guy, tried so hard to redirect the conversation, but she kept pulling out diagrams of meow pitch frequencies and saying things like, "See? That's how he knew I threw out his frozen burritos." The husband's lawyer finally said, "For the record, my client denies being a feline telepath." The judge ordered a psych evaluation, not for the husband, for her. It came back recommending therapy, but not declaring her unfit. So the case went on, with the cat listed under disputed property. Story 10. I represented a man whose wife was leaving him after 17 years. She cited irreconcilable differences. But what really triggered it all was a garden. He'd become obsessed with this gnome they bought on vacation in Austria, gave it a name, built it a home in their backyard, created a whole backstory for it. We're talking medieval lore levels of detail. She said at first it was quirky, then it got creepy. He started consulting the gnome before making big decisions, like refinancing the house or buying a car. He claimed the gnome had guided them through COVID. When she threw the gnome out, he went into a rage and told her she had murdered a spiritual entity. He wanted it cited in the divorce papers as destruction of a shared mystical asset. We did not do that. In the final hearing, he brought in a replacement gnome and set it beside him like a co-counsel. The judge just sighed and said, "Let's move on." Story 11. I once worked a divorce case where the husband wanted the court to ban his wife from using a specific emoji. No, seriously. He claimed that every time she texted him the thumbs up emoji, it was a deliberate psychological attack meant to mock and belittle him. He went on to explain how it was her preferred method of gaslighting and how it destroyed his self-worth in 2022. He submitted screenshots, dozens of them, of texts with nothing but the emoji. Every one of them was just her acknowledging receipt of something like, "I'll pick up the kids at 5. But to him, it was warfare. The judge, bless her patience, told him that emojis were not legally binding forms of emotional abuse. His response? Then the legal system is complicit in digital terrorism. She granted the divorce. No emoji restrictions, though. Story 12. I once had a client insist that her husband was not technically human, and therefore their marriage should be voided, not dissolved. She wasn't speaking metaphorically either. She meant he was an interdimensional entity wearing human skin. She even drew sketches of what she claimed he looked like under his flesh disguise. When we explained this was a divorce proceeding and not an episode of the X-Files, she got frustrated and said, "You're all part of it too." We moved forward with standard filings, and surprisingly, the husband never contested any of it. Maybe because he wanted out just as badly. To this day, I wonder if he agreed to the divorce just to avoid her revealing his true Story 13. In one contentious divorce, the couple was arguing about splitting their collectibles. The wife wanted to keep their shared collection of Funko Pops, over 400 of them. The husband, furious, said, "That's my soul archive. I've spent years curating that shelf." Then he pulled out a handwritten Funko prenup they had allegedly signed, stating that in the event of a breakup, he retained all characters deemed emotionally vital. It was written in crayon on the back of a Domino's pizza receipt. He made his case by categorizing each pop figure under emotional value tiers. Tier 1 included his OG glow-in-the-dark Skeletor and Chrome Darth Vader. He even cried when talking about his limited edition Vegeta. The judge ended up splitting the collection down the middle by having each of them take turns picking from the shelf, like a dodgeball team. Grown adults. Drafting toys. Story 14. There was a case where the husband insisted he didn't owe alimony because he believed he had been emotionally pregnant for the last 5 years of their marriage. I had no idea what that meant. Apparently, he said he had been carrying the emotional weight of both of them and described it as gestating the soul of their connection. He claimed this had the same toll as a physical pregnancy and that he deserved a kind of reverse compensation. He even submitted fake medical records from some sketchy website titled manwomb.com to support his theory. The judge didn't say a word. She just slowly removed her glasses, closed the folder, and said, "Counselor, please advise your client that metaphysical childbirth is not grounds for financial exemption." He still tried to claim emotional child support. It was denied, shockingly. Story 15. I represented a woman who was divorcing her husband after he started a cult in their backyard. At first, she thought he was just doing some weird spiritual retreat thing. But within months, he'd set up tents, installed a gong, and had 3 other grown adults living out there full-time, calling him the enlightened BBQ master. Yes, BBQ. His belief system revolved around grilling as a form of divine connection. He said fire was the original god and that smoked brisket opened the third eye. He even had ceremonial robes, aprons with slogans like "Grill Father" and "Meat is Love." She drew the line when he tried to get their kids to chant around a brisket before dinner. In court, he represented himself and said she was committing spiritual genocide. The judge asked if he had any legal precedent. He just said, "Yes, the flame." She got full custody. And the grill. Story 16. I was working as an assistant for a divorce attorney when we had a case where the wife requested that the husband return all the years he wasted. At first, we thought it was symbolic language. Nope, she had itemized the years, complete with breakdowns. 2011, the year of broken promises. 2014, the year he forgot my birthday twice, and so on. She was demanding $365 per year for each day of emotional imprisonment plus extra for leap years. She also wanted interest. She referred to the total as emotional back rent. The husband, visibly stunned, whispered, "She kept a ledger?" And she pulled out a literal bind, tabs and everything. The judge dismissed the request, but I'll never forget the phrase she used in closing. "If I can't get the time back, I'll at least send him the invoice." Story 17. The most unhinged thing I ever saw in a courtroom? A man brought his mistress as a character witness during the divorce trial, and then proposed to her in the middle of his testimony. He was on the stand, trying to explain why he wasn't at fault for the breakdown of the marriage, and suddenly turns to this woman in the gallery and says, "Jenna, I can't imagine a future without you. Will you marry me once this is done?" His lawyer dropped his pen. The judge blinked in disbelief. The wife stood up and clapped sarcastically, saying, "Perfect. Let's put that in the transcript." To top it off, the mistress said yes. Right there, in court. Later that afternoon, the wife's attorney brought it up during the alimony debate, and the judge simply said, "Yeah, that proposal pretty much closed the door on the faithful husband argument." Story 18. In a mediation session, the husband claimed his wife had been emotionally married to a fictional character for most of their relationship. When asked to elaborate, he said she had an unhealthy and codependent obsession with Legolas from The Lord of the Rings. Apparently, she would refer to him as "my real soulmate," kept an entire shrine of figurines and fan art, and once told the husband during a fight, "You'll never be half the elf Legolas is." He said he never felt safe competing with someone immortal. The wife didn't even deny it. She just shrugged and said, "Well, Legolas listens." They ended up settling outside of court, but the husband insisted on keeping the replica elven sword because, in his words, "I earned that. I lived in the shadow of an elf for a decade." Story 19. I had a case where the wife accused the husband of hiding assets, which turned out to be a massive stash of Beanie Babies he'd kept in a storage unit under his mom's name. She found out when he accidentally left the key in his coat pocket, and she got curious. The unit was full, floor to ceiling, thousands of them, meticulously tagged and sealed. It looked like a plush museum. She brought photos to court. He claimed they were sentimental, not financial, but she got an expert appraiser who said the collection was worth over $25,000, possibly more. His face went pale. The judge ordered them to be split even. The husband objected, saying, "She doesn't even appreciate the Princess Diana bear." They ended up doing a literal coin toss for each one. The judge let them take turns picking like it was a fantasy football draft. People were betting in the hallway. Story 20. One time, I was sitting in on a Zoom court session. Thank you, pandemic-era law. And the husband started screen sharing a PowerPoint presentation titled, "Reasons I Deserve Half Her Etsy Business." This dude had charts, pie graphs, bullet points like, "I folded boxes on 2 separate occasions. I provided emotional support during inventory stress. My idea to name the shop Chic Envy was a game changer." The wife jumped in and said, "You wanted to name it Vibe Tribe, and I begged you not to." He replied, "That name had branding potential." The judge stopped the presentation after slide 17, which featured a meme of a crying Michael Jordan labeled, "Me, watching her success after I supported her dreams." Needless to say, he did not get half. But he did get immortalized in our office group chat for that meme. Story 21. I worked with a client who, during mediation, demanded the return of a single spoon. Just one. Not a valuable one. Not sentimental. Not even part of a matching set. Just a single, slightly bent silver spoon. His reasoning? It's the only one that feels right in my mouth. He claimed it had a perfect curve, ideal weight, and that using it calmed his nerves. He said he couldn't properly enjoy cereal or yogurt without it, and had been suffering deeply since its abduction. The wife just stared blankly for a moment and then said, "I threw that thing out a year ago. It was weirdly bent and gross." He gasped audibly. "You what?" They spent the next 30 minutes arguing about cutlery while the mediator looked like she was silently begging the ceiling to open up and swallow her whole. Story 22. I once watched a man try to argue that his video game accounts were living extensions of his soul, and thus not marital property. He was dead serious. Claimed his maxed-out World of Warcraft characters, his rare skins in Fortnite, and his vintage Nintendo collection were non-transferable spiritual artifacts. He even had a notarized gamer will, where he designated his cousin as the rightful heir should anything happen to him. The wife, who had supported him financially for years while he built this digital empire, just wanted a portion of the resale value. The judge asked if the accounts were under his name. He confirmed. The judge asked if any purchases were made using joint finances. Again, yes. Judge ruled that the accounts had monetary value and would be appraised. The guy started crying, saying, "You're killing them. You're killing my characters." He now streams full-time and refers to the divorce as the Great Loot Split of 2023. Story 23. In one of the strangest divorce court moments I've ever seen, a wife accused her husband of communicating with her only through post-it notes for the last 8 months of their marriage. No face-to-face conversations. No texts. Just sticky notes. She brought in an entire folder labeled Exhibit A, His Sticky Silence. Notes like, "Please move your car. We're out of peanut butter." And my personal favorite, "I no longer love you. Sorry." He didn't deny it. He said he found verbal communication too draining and claimed that post-its let him curate his emotional output. He then added, "Also, I like the texture." The judge asked if he had anything to say verbally during the proceedings. He pulled a yellow post-it from his pocket that said, "No further comment." They were divorced within the hour. Story 24. A client once told me, with a completely straight face, that he was divorcing his wife because she cheated on him emotionally with her book club. He insisted that the weekly meetings, which rotated between 5 women and some wine, were actually secret rendezvous designed to undermine his authority. He claimed she looked happier reading fiction than she ever did at their wedding. He even tried to subpoena the group chat between the book club members, saying he suspected treasonous affection. The messages were basically just wine memes, Goodreads links, and a lot of "OMG this chapter." The wife laughed out loud in court and said, "Honestly, they got me through being married to you." The judge told him, very politely, that fictional jealousy wasn't grounds for alimony denial. We still refer to it in the office as the 50 Shades case. Story 25. I once assisted on a divorce where the wife wanted full custody of their Halloween decorations. And we're not talking a couple plastic pumpkins. This was a full-blown, professionally designed haunted yard setup that made local news every October. She had blueprints, receipts, even emails with prop designers. She called it her masterpiece. The husband, however, argued that he provided the spirit and the screams by acting as the haunted butler every year. At one point, he actually said, "Without me, it's just spooky clutter. I brought the soul." Her reply? "You brought cheap jump scares and bad acting." They ended up splitting the decorations. Literally. Each party walked away with half the props, including a zombie torso the wife accused him of undermining with cartoonish moaning. He tried to file an emergency order the next Halloween when she posted pics of the setup on Instagram without crediting his haunting contribution. The judge dismissed it immediately. Story 26. I was present for a deposition where the husband accused his wife of psychic manipulation. He claimed she had been sending him negative energy through the walls whenever she was upset. He described symptoms like ear buzzing, fridge malfunctioning, and general vibes of doom. The wife, without skipping a beat, pulled out a crystal from her purse and said, "This one? I use it to block your nonsense, not send it." He went on a 10-minute rant about her weaponized aura and demanded a clause in the settlement that she not engage in any metaphysical contact post-divorce. His lawyer looked like he regretted every career choice that led him there. In the end, we settled quietly, but our office still refers to it as the Ghostbusters deposition. Story 27. This one still blows my mind. The husband wanted to keep half of the wife's tattoo. She had a large back piece they got together, a design of two phoenixes intertwining. He claimed the tattoo represented their eternal bond, and that half of it was his soul. He actually tried to argue that if she was keeping the physical tattoo, he should get 50% of its value in cash or be allowed to tattoo over it, with his side of the story. The judge was speechless for a full 10 seconds before asking, "Sir, are you suggesting a counter tattoo?" He replied, "Yes, or at least a QR code linking to my blog explaining everything." Needless to say, the request was denied, and her next tattoo was a dagger going right through the phoenix's heart. Story 28. I once sat in on a mediation where a couple was fighting over a shared TikTok account. It had gone semi-viral with prank videos and couple challenges. The husband wanted full rights to the account, claiming he was the star and carried the brand. The wife said she created and edited all the content and that he barely knew how to hold a camera. To prove his point, he pulled out a ring light, set up his phone, and tried to film a TikTok in the mediation room to demonstrate his natural charisma. He even started doing a dance while waiting for the mediator to return. The mediator walked in mid-routine, sighed, and said, "We're not doing this." Eventually, they agreed to shut the account down and start fresh separate. Last I checked, they each have solo channels now. Hers is mostly skincare tips. His is conspiracy theories about why TikTok shadow banned him. Story 29. One of the most surreal cases I ever saw involved a woman trying to list her husband's mother as a marital asset. She said, "I invested 10 years in winning that woman over. She calls me more than she calls him. I deserve visitation rights." She wasn't joking. She had photos, texts, and even videos of them doing holidays together, just the two of them. The husband, on the other hand, wanted no part of his mom anymore and said, "She's more of a mother to her than to me anyway. Let her keep her." This spiraled into a bizarre argument over who was mom's favorite, ending with the mother herself being brought in as a witness. She looked absolutely thrilled to be in court and said, "Honestly, I think I'll stick with my daughter-in-law." The judge shut it down but quietly smiled the entire time. Story 30. During a particularly long and petty case, the wife demanded ownership of all the spices in their kitchen. Not furniture, not the appliances, just the spices. She called it her flavor empire. She brought a spreadsheet listing every jar of paprika, cumin, and obscure Himalayan salts. She even assigned each one a flavor profile and usage frequency score. Her reasoning? He doesn't season anything. He doesn't deserve them. The husband countered by saying, "She's right. I didn't even know we had a spice rack. I thought that was part of the wall." The judge didn't even blink and just granted her full spice custody. The best part? As she walked out, she said, "Guess he can enjoy his bland little life now." No one clapped. But emotionally, we all did. Story 31. There was a husband who demanded his wife return every ounce of ketchup he had purchased during the marriage. Apparently, he was obsessed with the stuff. Used it on everything. When we asked what exactly he meant, he pulled out a folder labeled Ketchup Inventory. It had receipts, dozens, organized by date, brand, and fluid ounces. He claimed he spent over $700 on ketchup alone over 8 years and wanted either reimbursement or the bottles returned. The wife, clearly fed up, said, "Fine, I'll mail them to you," with every lid loosened. The mediator asked him if he was serious. His response? "You can't put a price on tomato-based loyalty." We gave him 3 unopened bottles and called it even. But I'm fairly certain he left thinking he won. Story 32. I was involved in a case where the husband believed the wife owed him for intellectual property theft because she took a cookie recipe they had developed together and started selling it on Instagram. He genuinely wanted royalties. He called himself the culinary architect behind the brand and compared their cookie to the iPhone of desserts. He even cited an email where he once typed, "Try adding sea salt." She pointed out that he didn't bake, didn't taste test, and had no idea how to run an oven. His entire contribution was saying the words sea salt in 2019. The judge dryly asked if there was a patent involved. He said, "No, but there should be." She kept the recipe, the business, and the cookies. He left court with a melted protein bar and a bruised ego. Story 33. I once worked a case where the wife wanted the court to recognize her dog as a co-parent, not of a child, but of a bonsai tree. She and her soon-to-be ex had grown and shaped the bonsai together for 5 years. She believed the dog was emotionally bonded with the tree and would suffer if it didn't come with her. The husband didn't care about the tree, but was furious at the idea of the dog going with her. So they argued for hours about how much time the dog should get with the bonsai. In the end, the wife got both, but agreed to send monthly growth updates via email. I saw the first one. She included a slideshow with spa music in the background titled Bonsai's Journey to Inner Peace. Story 34. During a courtroom session, the husband requested full ownership of their home gym because, in his words, the equipment recognizes my dominance. He claimed that because he had sweated on every machine, they had bonded with him on a spiritual and physiological level. He insisted his wife never reached full synergy with the rowing machine and therefore didn't deserve it. The wife responded by producing a screenshot of his Amazon order history showing he bought most of the gym equipment during a midlife crisis, along with a vibrating belt and a Primal Grunt workout DVD. The judge asked if the equipment had been purchased with joint funds. It had. The wife got the gym. The husband asked to take only the belt and DVD, muttering, "They understand me." Story 35. A client once told me her husband kept starting arguments just to storm out and sleep in his car, then would claim separate residences to try and prove they were already living apart. This went on for months. He'd sleep in the driveway, in the garage, even once in the backyard hammock under a tarp. He'd text her, "I've moved out. Legally, we're done." When we brought it up in court, his attorney said, "Your Honor, my client has relocated." The judge asked where. He replied, "The Subaru Outback parked in the driveway." The judge said, "That is not a residence. That is a tantrum." Needless to say, the wife got the house. He got a flat tire and an official notice to grow up. Story 36. A woman once filed an emergency motion during her divorce because her husband wouldn't stop prank calling her as different characters. He'd use apps to disguise his voice and call her pretending to be a Russian spy, a confused Uber driver, even a medieval knight asking for fair maiden assistance. She said it started as a weird way to cope with the separation. But then he began calling at 3 a.m., using blocked numbers and leaving voicemails like, "This is Commander Frostbite. The emotional perimeter has been breached." In court, the husband said, "I thought humor could heal us." The judge replied, "Sir, this is harassment, not open mic night." A restraining order was filed. And yes, the final call before the block was a voicemail of him as Yoda saying, "Alone you shall be, Story 37. I had a client who insisted we include in the official divorce decree that her ex-husband was never allowed to attempt stand-up comedy again. Apparently, during their marriage, he had gone to an open mic once and bombed so hard he left the venue mid-set. But what pushed her over the edge was that every argument they had after that, he'd respond with, "That's going in my set." She said she lived in constant fear of being used as material for a career that didn't exist. She even brought in his joke notebook as evidence, complete with punchlines like, "Marriage is like a Wi-Fi signal, fine until she walks in." The judge didn't include the comedy clause, but did chuckle and say, "Maybe workshop those a bit." Story 38. One case involved a husband who was absolutely convinced that his wife had placed a curse on their garage. He said ever since she started storing her yoga mats and crystals in there, he had constant bad luck. Flat tires, stubbed toes, power tools breaking for no reason. He demanded she remove all witchcraft items and called her yoga group a coven of stretch demons. The wife, who was trying very hard not to laugh, explained that the only things in the garage were a foam roller, 2 succulents, and a salt lamp. The judge asked if he had any evidence of supernatural sabotage. He responded, "My aura has been cloudy for weeks." She got the house. He left with a toolbox and a firm recommendation for therapy. Story 39. During one particularly bitter divorce trial, the wife calmly explained that she wanted the PlayStation 5, not because she played video games, but because it brings him more joy than I ever did, and I'd like him to feel the loss. The husband looked horrified. "That's psychological warfare." She shrugged and said, "So was our entire marriage." They went back and forth for an hour over one console. He offered her furniture, cash, even the dog, just not the PlayStation 5. She refused every offer. The judge eventually told them to resolve it in mediation. The final agreement? She kept the console. He got a vintage guitar she didn't care about. As they signed, she looked at him and said, "Now you'll know what it's like to watch someone else play." Cold. Ruthless. Honestly impressive. Story 40. This couple fought over naming rights to their sourdough starter. I'm serious. They had started baking together during the pandemic and created a starter they named Doughy Parton. The wife wanted full custody and to keep the name. The husband said the starter was a joint microbial enterprise and that he deserved shared access, or at least the name rights. They brought in pictures, timestamps, even a chart tracking bubble activity to prove who cared for it more. The husband argued that he created the pun and that the name was culturally relevant IP. Eventually, the judge asked, "What even is a sourdough starter?" After a lengthy explanation, the court ruled she could keep the starter and the name, but the husband was allowed to create a new one, as long as he chose a different pun. He named his bread Sheeran. No one was surprised. Story 41. I had a divorce case where the husband insisted he be allowed to retrieve his clone. We thought he meant a pet or something. Nope. Turned out he had paid a ridiculous amount of money to some shady overseas lab to create a hyper-realistic silicone mannequin modeled after himself. Life-size, detailed, dressed in his old clothes. He said it helped him cope with existential loneliness, and he often talked to it, took it on car rides, and even included it in family photos. The wife was understandably disturbed. She said it used to sit at the dinner table when he was traveling, and she often walked in on him consulting with it. When the divorce started, he demanded she return my second self, claiming she was holding it hostage. She, on the other hand, claimed she locked it in the attic because it scared the dog and traumatized the kids. The judge actually had to clarify, "To be clear, we are discussing custody of an inanimate object resembling the petitioner." He said, "He's not inanimate to me." There was a very long pause. Eventually, we negotiated a visitation schedule so he could retrieve it discreetly. He picked it up wearing sunglasses and a trench coat. I still have nightmares about that thing. Story 42. In one wild courtroom circus, the husband submitted a full PowerPoint titled "Why I Deserve the House, the Boat, and the Blender." Not the house and boat part, that was expected. But the blender? That's where the battle really started. The blender was a top-tier Vitamix, and apparently both were obsessed with it. He claimed he used it for his morning smoothies, protein shakes, and emotional regulation. She claimed she used it more, had cleaned it more times, and even named it Benny. His rebuttal? "I bought Benny. I poured my life into Benny." He also claimed that her smoothies were chaotic and acidic, while his were balanced and probiotic forward. I swear this actually went into the court record. They both offered to buy each other brand new blenders, but neither would give up Benny. The judge ended up flipping a coin. The wife won. The husband dramatically whispered, "Benny would have wanted this," and walked out. The next day, he posted a Facebook status. "Lost the house, the wife, and Benny. Pray for me." Story 43. I was present in court when a man claimed his wife emotionally abandoned him in favor of a Peloton bike. He said it started as a normal health kick, but soon she was riding for hours a day, joining online groups, live streaming rides, even referring to her favorite instructor as the only man who motivates. He said he'd wake up at 5 a.m. to the sound of "Let's go team" blasting from the other room. She started celebrating milestones with candles and champagne, alone, in her workout gear. Once, he found her hugging the bike after a 90-minute ride. He claimed she told the bike "I love you" under her breath. She admitted she was obsessed, but countered by saying, "At least the bike doesn't interrupt me every time I speak." He asked the court for emotional damages stemming from replacement by machinery. The judge, trying hard not to laugh, told him, "Sir, you cannot file a jealousy complaint against cardio equipment." He lost the case, and she kept the Peloton, and probably kept pedaling right past the pain. Story 44. There was a divorce where the central point of conflict wasn't assets or alimony. It was over a fantasy football trophy. A cheap, plastic thing from a work league that somehow became the hill both parties were willing to die on. The husband had won it 3 times. The wife claims she made all his draft picks while he was at work. She presented spreadsheets and screenshots showing she managed the entire team. He countered by saying, "I approve the lineup. That's leadership." To make it worse, the trophy had been engraved with "The King of Gridiron Glory," and she wanted it changed to "The Couple That Dominated 2019. He refused. The judge finally got so tired of the bickering, she suggested they melt the trophy down and make 2 keychains. The wife loved the idea. The husband was horrified. He appealed to keep the trophy intact for legacy purposes. The appeal was denied. 2 months later, we heard he tried to recreate it using a 3D printer. Never underestimate a man's attachment to plastic and pride. Story 45. In one of the most bizarre and surprisingly civil divorces I ever worked, the couple agreed on everything. House, cars, bank accounts, no arguments. But then they hit a wall over a shared online Minecraft world. They had been building this digital utopia together for years. Castles, farms, entire cities. Their usernames were carved into virtual monuments. They had in-game pets named after their real ones. It was honestly impressive. The wife wanted to preserve the world as is. The husband wanted to reset it and start fresh post-divorce. He claimed it was symbolic of their failed relationship. She accused him of trying to burn down years of creativity out of spite. When they couldn't agree, their attorneys had to hire a Minecraft server expert to clone the world and give each party a separate copy. But even that caused issues. Who would keep the original server name? Who got the in-game diamonds? Eventually, the judge said, "I can't believe I'm saying this, but I encourage both of you to treat your Minecraft assets with the same respect as physical ones." They did. Last I checked, the wife renamed her world New Beginnings, and the husband started his as Freedom Fortress. Story 46. One of the most bizarre divorce negotiations I ever witnessed revolved around a collection of garden gnomes, about 70 of them. The husband was obsessed. Each had names, birth certificates, and themed roles. There was a chef gnome, a wizard gnome, even a retired dentist gnome complete with tiny dentures. The wife claimed the gnomes watched her sleep because he kept some of them near the windows. She said he would talk to them while gardening, and once threw a fit when she accidentally knocked over Sir Gnomefree, who apparently governed the others. In mediation, he demanded 100% custody of the gnomes, stating, "They are a community, not a collection. They cannot be split or they'll lose their morale." He even brought in photos of them gathered at council to demonstrate their bond. The wife agreed, on one condition. He had to take them all, including the 6 that had been in the attic since 2017 after she found one in the shower. As they walked out, she muttered, "At least now I won't be outnumbered in my own yard." Story 47. I represented a woman divorcing a man who believed he was a Viking, like full-on Norse warrior, long hair, furs, drinking from a horn, the whole bit. He tried to argue in court that modern law didn't apply to him because he was bound only by the old ways. He refused to respond to the judge unless addressed as Bjorn the He even brought a wooden shield into court and propped it beside him, insisting it was his legal right to present his case as my ancestors would. The judge gave him exactly 3 warnings to drop the act. On the 3rd, Bjorn bellowed, "Then I claim trial by combat," and unsheathed a replica sword from beneath his cloak. Security tackled him. Sword broke in half. The shield was confiscated. The judge sighed and said to me, "Let's fast-track this before he brings a long ship to the next hearing." The wife was awarded everything, including the dog, ironically named Loki. Story 48. This couple fought over a shared journal. Not just any journal, but one they had been writing in together for 12 years. It was filled with thoughts, letters to each other, doodles, ticket stubs, pressed flowers. It had started as a bonding project, but by the end of their marriage, it had become a passive-aggressive battlefield. She wrote sweet notes, reflections, even poems. He added sarcastic commentary in the margins. On a love letter she once wrote, he scribbled, "Too dramatic, but I respect the rhyming." Their last few entries devolved into written arguments. One page literally just said, "See page 32," and on page 32 it read, "You still owe me $40. In court, both wanted the journal. She said it represented her emotional labor. He said it was comedy gold. The judge ruled that each party would get a digital scan, and the physical copy would go to her, because she had written 90% of it. As they left, he said, "At least let me keep the page with the burger review." He didn't get it. Story 49. A man tried to argue that his soon-to-be ex-wife owed him back pay for his role as the unofficial family DJ. He claimed that for over a decade, he had curated the soundtrack to every road trip, holiday gathering, and dinner party, and that his mood-matching playlist skills had created thousands of dollars worth of ambiance. He provided spreadsheets showing playlists by mood, genre, and season. He even made a pie chart titled Vibe Distribution, 2009 to 2023. It included slices for chill, sexy dinner, and car sing-alongs. The judge was baffled and asked, "Are you asking for financial compensation? For Spotify use?" "Yes," he said proud. Curated energy is a service. She asked if he was serious. He nodded. His wife just stared at the floor, possibly reconsidering every major life choice. He didn't get a dime, but he did request to add a Spotify link to the official court transcript. Declined. Story 50. There was a divorce case where the wife demanded the return of all her ex-husband's love letters so she could sell them as a poetry collection. She claimed they were raw, terrible, and unintentionally hilarious. And she had already drafted a book proposal called Love is Cringe, Letters from My Ex. He argued that the letters were private, sacred, and protected under spiritual copyright. His main concern wasn't the writing, it was his unique metaphors being mocked. Examples? One letter described her eyes as 2 soft-boiled eggs of passion. Another compared her hair to the scream of a raven on a windy day. The court ruled that she could keep the originals since they were addressed to her, but publishing rights were another story. In the end, they reached an agreement. She wouldn't publish the full collection, but he couldn't stop her from reading excerpts at open mic nights. She did, and apparently they killed. Story 51. This case still haunts me. The husband demanded a clause in the divorce agreement that the wife could never again use the phrase "it is what it is." He said those 5 words had eroded his soul over the course of their 12-year marriage. He claimed that anytime there was a disagreement, a disappointment, or a financial screw-up, she'd shrug and say, "It is what it is." He said it made him feel like he was living in a never-ending shrug. She didn't deny it. In fact, she smiled and said, "Well, it is what it is." You could feel the rage rise in him. He slammed his hand on the table and said, "That right there, that's the emotional equivalent of ghosting someone while staring them in the face." The judge didn't include the phrase "ban" in the decree, but did say, "I recommend avoiding each other's catchphrases for your own mental health." Later, the wife asked if she could get it printed on a mug for court memorabilia. We declined. Story 52. A woman filed for divorce after discovering her husband had secretly been living a double life as a medieval blacksmith on weekends. Not cheating, not crime. Just full-blown LARPing in the woods every Saturday and Sunday. He had an entire alternate persona named Thorn Ironjaw, forged weapons, had a medieval Instagram account, and once performed a sword wedding for a fellow knight and elven archer. She found out after his boss posted a weekend BBQ photo, and he was in the background holding a goblet and wearing chainmail. In court, he begged to keep his forge equipment and live steel, saying, "It is my true identity." She just wanted him to take down a mural he painted of a dragon on their garage wall. The judge allowed the mural to stay, but granted her full custody of the home. As he left, he whispered, "Thorn Ironjaw rides alone once more." Story 53. I once worked a divorce where the couple's primary conflict was over a shared Twitter account they had run together, called @MarriedAndPetty. They tweeted about everyday marriage squabbles, leaving dishes in the sink, thermostat battles, annoying habits. The account blew up and got over 300,000 followers. Brands started sponsoring their posts. But the thing is, all the tweets were real. Real arguments posted public. She wanted to continue the account so he wanted it deleted entirely. He said it had turned their private moments into internet currency and accused her of monetizing his involuntary vulnerability. She responded, "You knew exactly what this was when you agreed to tweet about the way you snore." They argued over who owned the jokes. A digital asset evaluator said the account was worth nearly $40,000 in annual ad potential. In the end, they split the brand. She got the account. He started his own called Ex-Husband Energy. Spoiler, it flopped. Story 54. A husband came into mediation with a very serious request. He wanted to retain exclusive rights to their inside jokes. He had a list, printed and laminated, with phrases like "the spaghetti incident," "left sock theory," and "but the duck survived." These were bizarre, couple-only jokes that made no sense to outsiders, but he argued they were emotional property, and he didn't want her using them with future partners. He called it joke fidelity. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. The wife responded by saying he could keep every single inside joke if she got the espresso machine. He hesitated, and then agreed. She walked away sipping a latte and saying, "But the duck survived. One last time." He flinched. Story 55. In one of the pettiest splits I've ever seen, the wife refused to give up the family's decorative Live, Laugh, Love wall art. Not because she liked it, but because she knew he hated it. He had complained about that sign for years, calling it aggressively basic and saying it haunted his dreams. But during the divorce, she fought tooth and nail to keep it hanging in the entryway. He begged to take it down, even offering to replace it with something modern and neutral. She refused. "This is my house now," she said, "and it will laugh, thank you very much." The judge, caught in the middle of this absurd decor war, asked if either party would consider replacing it with something less emotionally charged. She declined. 2 months later, he texted us a photo from a friend's house. Hanging over their door, another Live, Laugh, Love sign. Caption, "I'm never escaping." Story 56. I handled a divorce where the couple's biggest fight wasn't about money or custody. It was about who got to keep their shared playlist on Spotify. They had curated this playlist over a decade together, titled Us and Vibes, with over 800 songs. Each track had a memory, road trips, anniversaries, that one fight they had during Bohemian Rhapsody. The husband claimed he contributed more of the music and should have full control. The wife argued she was the one who emotionally coded the playlist through life events. She brought printed lyrics to songs she added and color-coded them by mood. He brought timestamps of when he added specific bangers. It escalated to the point where the judge literally said, We are not litigating streaming services. In the end, they were ordered to clone the playlist and remove each other's names from the title. He renamed his Her Loss, but also Mine, and she renamed hers Vibes Now Improved. Neither of them removed Bohemian Rhapsody. Story 57. This husband asked the court for ownership of exactly 27 framed photos of himself. Not family photos, not couple photos, just solo shots, posed, candid, selfies, and at least one where he was dressed like a Roman emperor, holding a bottle of wine. He said they were the best version of me and deserved to be preserved. The wife? She wanted to throw them out entirely, calling them monuments to delusion. She said he'd made a habit of hanging one in every room, even the bath, like he was running a museum of his own ego. He countered, "It's called self-love. Google it." Eventually, she agreed to let him take all 27 photos if she could keep their wedding album. He said, "Fine. Those weren't my best angles anyway." Story 58. There was a woman who insisted she be allowed to emotionally evict her husband from their shared friend group. She explained to the court in detail how she had introduced him to every single one of their mutual friends. She had friendship receipts, screenshots of group chats she started, parties she hosted, and people she introduced him to. She said he wasn't allowed to keep the humans after the divorce. He laughed and said, "You don't own friends." She replied, "Watch me." A few of the friends were even brought in to testify, awkwardly. One said, "Honestly, we're siding with her. She brings wine. He brings weird energy." The judge, clearly over it, ruled that the court had no jurisdiction over social circles. But later, we heard she threw a post-divorce party and named it the Custody of Vibes. Everyone came. He wasn't invited. Story 59. One man demanded intellectual restitution because he claimed his wife stole his idea for a book, an idea he never actually wrote. He said he'd been manifesting a dystopian novel for 5 years, casually mentioned it to her. And then she wrote a short story vaguely similar for a blog post that got some traction. He accused her of creative espionage. He even submitted a napkin with bullet points like, "World ends? Government collapse? Maybe bugs?" Protagonist is sad but hot. She pulled up the story. It was a completely different plot. He just kept yelling, but it had the same vibe. The judge looked him dead in the eye and said, "Sir, vibes are not copyrightable," and moved on. Story 60. During a hearing, the wife brought up how her husband had sabotaged every holiday for 10 years. Not in major ways, just in little, incredibly petty ones. She had a list. Forgot the turkey on Thanksgiving, 4 years in a row. Gave her a framed picture of himself for Valentine's Day. Got "Happy Birthday, Steve" written on her cake. Her name is not Steve. Once got her a Mother's Day card, even though they have no kids. He just smirked and said, "I was making memories." She looked at the judge and said, "I want the holidays back. All of them." While the court couldn't actually return holidays, the judge did grant her exclusive rights to host any future family events, including the Christmas tree, decor, and the shared crockpot. He objected over the crockpot, saying, "That thing knows my chili." The judge replied, "She knew your chili, and she's still walking away. Crockpot goes to her."